welcome to Talent Hub TV episode 19. We are finally here with Jannis Bott. I've had to beg, steal and borrow to get you here today, so I appreciate that. But I've got a lot I want to discuss with you. I've been building up to this point for a while, so thank you very much first and foremost. But a lot of people will know who you are, especially locally, but also a lot of the global audience will know. But for anyone that doesn't, who is Jannis Bott?
Well, that's the hard question to start with.
I thought I'd get a hard one in there.
Okay. Who am I? Well, I'm probably an immigrant is probably the best way to describe me. I came out here pretty much 9 years ago now.
Okay.
Became a resident, became a citizen.
Sure.
But obviously, my Salesforce journey really is in line with my Australia journey. So this is where I'm going to introduce the Salesforce and sort of like work my way through the ranks. I'm sure we'll talk about this later on.
And obviously for to catch people's attention if they're just tuning in, and so you are a CTA. You've been a CTA for
almost 2 years now.
Okay, cool. So we'll discuss how you went through that journey. But I'm guessing you didn't want to be a CTA when you were growing up. You probably didn't even know what that was. It probably wasn't even a thing. So what did you want to be? What was the kind of aspiration as you were?
I think as a kid you go through those stages, right? Like where first you want to be a firefighter, and then you want to be a policeman, and then you want to be a jet pilot. I was none of those. I think as a kid I really didn't know, but like what became quite apparent was sort of like when I was in my 16th, 17th year of age, I started my own business.
Okay.
And it was, funny enough, a software business with a couple of mates, and we built software for schools. So I already sort of like found out I think I'm quite good in consulting and talking to people and to either sell a product or to at least develop it, position it, etc.
Sure.
So that's sort of like how it started, and then it took a bit of an unexpected change where at that time it was compulsory to go to the army back in Germany.
Yeah.
So I declined the army service because not something I wanted to support.
Sure.
And had to do social work instead. So I worked for the Red Cross for almost a year, driving blood donations, organs, and even driving the ambulance car.
Was this full time?
That was full time. You have to do this. The government pays you. Pays you barely anything, but like
Because I'd heard that story about the ambulance driving. I didn't understand the context, but that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So you have to do it, right? And through that, I sort of like got introduced more to obviously the whole topic of medicine and started to develop an interest. I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and then I happened to have a good friend who was a neurosurgeon, and after that 1 year, I was 100% convinced I'll be a neurosurgeon.
Okay.
I was literally just planning to take 8 months to go to Australia, take a gap year, travel, and then I go back to study. And I had everything secured, right? Like as Germans are, right? Like you obviously have it all the ducks lined up, right? So I had my spot at university, I knew where it would be, I knew what I wanted to do. And then obviously coming to Australia changed everything. And falling into the Salesforce ecosystem was certainly not the chosen path.
Sure. So came here 9 years ago, and then that's kind of when your Salesforce journey started. How did that take shape?
So when you come as a backpacker, you obviously take any job. So I worked for one of the fundraising agencies who essentially eventually sponsored me, and that was at the time when they've decided to implement Salesforce.
Sure.
So I was the guy that was basically tasked with implementing Salesforce.
Without any prior Salesforce experience? Or?
Correct. So we used an implementation partner.
Okay.
So I was literally the classical end user who the company decided to buy a product, and then one person in-house has to do it.
This is your job.
Has to figure out how everything works, right? And that includes project management, right?
Sure.
Like at that time, I didn't know how to run a professional project, right?
Yeah.
What agile means, what testing means, and all those things.
Sure.
Right? So it was good to have an implementation partner to really get the guidance and the hand-holding that was definitely needed from me at that time.
So just going back to the software company that you started, were you at that point developing, or were you more sales and...
Yeah, good question. So I was primarily in product development.
Okay.
And it was sort of like, how you wear many hats when you run a startup. It was product development, but also trying to position it in talent and
Sure.
Get it delivered.
Okay, cool. So then you were at this fundraiser implementing Salesforce. Did you instantly kind of fall in love with the technology, or?
Yeah, I think it was sort of like a growing interest more than falling in love with it, you know. Like, I don't know how much I love Salesforce, right? That's definitely been a good career choice for me, right? So, and obviously as you grow, you start to develop your skills, you start to understand data structures and sort of like all the core declarative features.
Yeah.
But then I think that where I really started to fall in love, to use your terms, was when I started to learn how to develop.
Okay.
So for me, I learned how to code on the Salesforce platform, and that was really born out of a frustration of not understanding what the implementation partner was doing or how they were achieving the things that I wanted them to achieve.
Sure.
I really wanted to understand it at the technical level, and so I started to teach myself. I then got lucky to find a mentor, and I think that's one of the most important things, to have a mentor to actually coach you through the journey.
Yeah.
And tell you where you're wrong, because if you don't know what you don't know, how can you ever improve?
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
So I think that was crucial, and that's sort of like how I really started to dive into the more technical topics.
So would you, at that point, class yourself as a developer or more of like an all-rounder? What was your role at that point?
So I suppose I was tasked with sort of like looking after the wider IT infrastructure, not just Salesforce.
Sure.
And that included on-premise software. We had a whole bunch of challenges around PCI compliance because there was credit card data involved and all of that. We've built mobile apps on the Salesforce platform, and that was really sort of like when I started to get really involved. And I would have considered myself as the platform owner, but also then the developers, the developer. And it became pretty apparent that quite quickly I grew out of this company. Right? There was simply not enough opportunity to keep me interested.
Sure.
But it was clear that I stayed with Salesforce and all.
So what happened from there? Where next?
So after I left that company, I went to, just need to think, I actually went contracting. And I contracted for probably 6 months or so, until I realized that I was really lacking enterprise experience. And sort of like as a contractor, you probably know it better than I do, but it's quite hard to get into larger projects if you're not experienced. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to just get a bit more experience, especially on the project side of things, and hence joined Cloud Sherpas.
Yeah.
And with Cloud Sherpas, I stayed for quite a while to really upskill in a lot of areas, and I think that was a really good choice because it really sort of like increased my knowledge of Salesforce, but also I got a lot of coaching in terms of how to do things better, and I grew a lot in this company. That's probably fair to say.
So at what point did you did this CTA goal start becoming a thing, and did you know pretty much immediately that you were a legitimate candidate, or was it something that you always felt was going to be a stretch?
Look, no, I definitely didn't know that I was a suitable candidate, especially before I joined Cloud Sherpas, and even throughout the first couple of years at Sherpas, I questioned myself a lot in terms of like, am I actually doing this correctly? Am I doing this wrong? Because I hadn't studied IT and all that kind of stuff, right? Sure. And the CTA certainly was not the obvious path, and I think I found out about it sort of like by working with a bunch of CTAs at Sherpas.
Sure.
That then started to spark the interest. There were a couple of peers, obviously, at Sherpas that also were on the same sort of journey, but it was pretty clear to me that I wasn't ready. Right? I was getting my developer certifications and all that kind of stuff, so I was quite far away from it. I guess to your question, when did I know? After I left Sherpas, or Accenture it was then at some point, I went back contracting, and I think that's sort of like when I started to get more clear on the program, on what's involved, what the challenges are, and also sort of like where the gaps are. I've done a pretty comprehensive gap analysis, I would say, to just assess, hey, am I ready or not? And I think the gaps at that time seemed possible to be closed.
Sure.
And that's when I kicked it off.
So what was the plan from there? Like to go from I think I'm going to do this to actually getting to passing the board. What was your plan and preparation like?
So I think I decided in January or February to go for it, and knew that the board would be in June or July.
Sure.
So I gave myself roughly 6 months, and I think the first 3 months were sort of like closing knowledge gaps, so it's muscle memory essentially.
Yeah.
My method was I opened the setup menu in Salesforce and looked at every single setup menu item, and if I didn't know immediately the answer of what's behind that menu item, then that came into my study list, and that was essentially my catalog of questions or things that I needed to learn about. And at that time I also had Chris, who I've obviously studied with quite a bit, and we jumped on on calls every week and basically asked each other questions.
Sure.
Right? Like how does two-way SSL work? And then
I don't know.
Exactly. So maybe put on the study list.
So, because I've seen Chris present about like approaching the CTA review board and doing it alongside a buddy, and how important do you think that was for you and Chris?
To have a buddy, I think I would not have passed without a study buddy.
Really?
Right? So like, I'm sure it's possible, but it makes it just so much easier because you start to build trust with that person, so you're not afraid of showing a weakness. And I think quite often, when you're already a technical architect, showing a weakness for some people that's a bad thing. Well, I think it's actually a good thing if you can do that. But by having trust with the person that you're studying with, that element is just completely gone, and you just openly say, "Look, I have no idea what do you think about it?" Right?
Yeah.
I think that's one aspect. The other one is just to get an unbiased and honest view on where you're at. So like Chris and I have done mock exams with each other, and by the way, none of us had a CTA, so we didn't know what the expectation was. But I think the fact that we both sort of like did enough reading and studying on what's expected helped to sort of like then give feedback and say, look, I think this is not clear, or that element is not clear.
Yeah, I guess 2 eyes are better than one as well, right? So if there were any things you missed, he might have picked up on them and vice versa.
Yeah.
So you've also got a Masters of IT, which you did relatively late. Like you did it alongside your studies for your CTA, and when you were pretty far advanced in your Salesforce career.
That's right.
Why did you think that was important to go back and do that?
I don't know. Look, for me, it was always sort of like this rule: I'll have a degree before I'm 30.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like my own commitment to myself that I need to do that.
Sure.
So I think that was the key driver. But also, let's not forget, I fell into Salesforce from knowing nothing into knowing quite a bit.
Yeah.
And obviously there are knowledge gaps, right? If you haven't studied IT from the grounds up, there's certainly gaps where you think like, I guess that's how it works, but it's such a foundational thing that you never thought about it.
Sure.
And I think I was hoping with my degrees to close some of those knowledge gaps, and that's actually true, that happened.
Okay.
Right? So there were elements in project management, elements in management, but also really technical areas where really a lot of the gaps were closed that
so no regrets. Well, obviously, a Masters of IT is also a great achievement, not just the CTA.
Yeah, like I'm glad that I did it, but it was a very painful journey.
I know. It was speaking you through that period. I know it was a big commitment. So
exactly.
So, what's your view on the current market now in terms of the talent landscape? And that's a big question, but I want a big answer. Like, what do you make of the kind of skill sets that are out there in the Salesforce ecosystem?
Growing is probably an open answer to that.
Yeah.
So like, there are more and more people that obviously join the ecosystem, which is fantastic, right? There's still a skill shortage, etc. I think there's still plenty of opportunity, but you also see obviously that Salesforce starts to diversify now, right? Like they go into MuleSoft, they get into Tableau, and I do have the feeling that the standard sort of like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud implementation become less, and it's more like people start to specialize more. That's probably the right way of saying it. So somebody that is highly experienced and highly skilled in Health Cloud, for example, might have better career opportunities now than just being a generic service cloud implementation consultant.
Sure.
They're obviously built on top of each other, so it's just important basically that the people that are in the industry, that they continuously keep upskilling in the new industry solutions that are out there,
sure,
in order to stay, I guess, competitive with the rest, right?
Yeah.
And I don't see that enough. And I think the other thing that I'd like to see more is just to, especially at the technical level, to look a bit more at how do other technologies solve the same problem, right? I would love for our developers in the ecosystem to think more about how can I build more reusable things? How can I make sure that whatever I'm implementing right now is not just going to solve the problem right now, but also solves a problem in 5 years or can be extended. And I think that element of thinking doesn't always happen. And I think one of the reasons is because a lot of people fall into the Salesforce ecosystem as a first job, or they haven't studied like me, right? Like I'm a perfect example.
Yeah, and I get that. I think like we've heard clients commenting that now people have grown up in the Salesforce ecosystem and that's it. Yeah. And then like the hardest roles we have to fill are Salesforce developers with a really experienced CTO or engineering manager. Because they look at the candidates and they think these aren't software developers or engineers, and I think that's where you're kind of coming from.
That's exactly right.
So you mentioned there's a talent shortage, and I agree, but I do think there are a lot more candidates in the market than there were. But there's a lot of kind of entry-level candidates. So have you seen people pick up Salesforce relatively quickly? And if so, where are they coming from?
Yes, I think let's differentiate between functional and technical.
Sure.
So I think there are a lot of people that even cross-skilled, right? They've done completely different jobs in the past, and they just cross-skilled into a functional consultant or a CRM manager role, and they're doing extremely well because it is so straightforward to pick up. Obviously, you need to respect a couple of ground rules, but it's quite easy to pick up. At the technical level, exactly to your point, I think it's easy to get something to work, but to get something to work well, that takes experience, and sort of like also you need to be curious and challenge yourself and ask yourself, is that the right way? Could I do this better?
Sure.
Etc. And I think that's why I don't think it's easy to pick up. You need to really have experience. And I think if you're coming from, let's say, a traditional Java development background, or now with Lightning Web Components, maybe from a front-end development background, I think you're actually transitioning really easily because you bring that skill set from software development already with you. But if you start from scratch, then it's like learning any other development language,
of course. Yeah, I think like people say this, and they say like a Java developer can pick things up quickly, but we still do see companies hesitant and resistant to give them a chance, even if they're struggling to find an experienced Salesforce developer. And I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know what the answer is. I think it's but it's definitely a challenge.
I suppose like if you're hiring a Salesforce person, then you want them to be able to be effective in their role immediately. And like obviously if you hire a Java developer, even though the ramp-up time might be quick, but it might be still a month, 3 months, right? So that is still a time frame that you need to bridge somehow. And sometimes the need for a solution right now is greater than the time that you have to upskill.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one observation I've had is that I'm not saying that people can't make the transition from technical to management, but there's definitely a lack of people that are willing to or keen to make that transition from like into a people management role. So we've had roles recently where we're presenting the role to a really senior, I'd say technical architect, and their focus is I want to be a CTA. Therefore, why do I want to manage people? Do you think is that an observation you've seen, and do you think there's anything we can do to make that role more appealing in terms of team management?
I don't know if it's a challenge of willingness or ability. I think on the functional side, again, a lot, or what I see is a lot of the people that use, let's call it the declarative features of the Salesforce platform, they're naturally coming more from a business background and a consulting background, so they're naturally great in communication and great in team building, and they sort of like make quite good managers in general,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm sure there are exceptions don't, etc. On the technical level, I think it's a lot harder, right?
Sure.
Like I think, and I don't want to have the cliche of like developers only developers, because I think they're fantastic developers that make great people manager. I think they're just rare,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And especially technical people that can speak a human, right, or can translate complex things into simple things,
Yeah.
Are rare to find. But those are the ones that normally tend to be quite good people managers. That's
Sure.
what I found. So yeah, again, back to the point. I think it's more an ability rather than a willingness.
Sure, because I think in other markets you go, like it's often the progression developer, senior developer, development manager. Whereas actually in the Salesforce ecosystem, it goes developer, senior developer, technical architect, CTA. So it's that whole piece that it goes down that route. And I've made some comments on LinkedIn before as to I wonder if that's because the CTA is such a draw that that's why people don't want to manage. That could be it.
Also, I think there's a difference between when it comes to consultancies versus end users.
Sure.
So I think at an end user, your career path is different to a consultancy, right?
Yeah.
Consultancy certs are an important factor in the way how we measure success with our partner Salesforce.
Yeah.
Where at an end user, that's not a measure, right? There's probably outcomes and delivering projects on time a lot more important than being a CTA.
Sure.
So I think there could be even the difference as well, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Certainly, you're right. What we see a lot is that career path from developer, senior dev, architect, and then ideally CTA.
Sure.
Which I don't know if I necessarily agree with as a perfect career path.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure. So if you could change one thing about the Salesforce ecosystem, what would it be?
The CTA shouldn't be the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously I've gone through the journey, so it's easy to say, right?
Sure.
But not all things get easier when you're CTA, because suddenly you are the one that apparently knows everything, and I don't. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be brutally honest. I don't know everything, and there's certain things where I feel like a lot of our developers or consultants know significantly more in a particular topic than I do.
Yeah.
Right, and I think this sort of like everything status is hard to hold up, right? And it puts to a certain extent even pressure on you to live up to that expectation.
Sure.
The other reason is it's obviously extremely hard to get, and I don't know if it's a long-term career choice to become a CTA, if that's going to give you the satisfaction that you're after. So I think my sort of like words to every aspiring CTA is be really clear why you want to be a CTA and what the benefits are that you want to get out of it. And if you're really clear, then perfect, go for it, and I'm sure that person will succeed. But if you're not clear and you just do it sort of like for fun,
because it's the thing to do.
Exactly. Then I would reassess. That's probably my advice.
What did it change for you? Did you feel more confident having the CTA than before, or did it change the way that people kind of acknowledge your solutions?
I think credibility is probably the first thing that comes to mind. If you enter a room and people know that you're CTA, again, to that point, there's the expectation, that guy knows everything. There's certainly, you're a lot more credible straight away, where before I think I had to prove myself more in order to get that trust. I think that's the biggest change.
Sure. Okay. So you're a young guy. You got the CTA when you were young, and you've achieved a lot. You've achieved what a lot of people are planning to at the end of their Salesforce career. That's their goal.
Yeah.
So what's left for you, and what's next for you in terms of where you want to take your career?
Yeah, look, I don't know is the answer, right? Like it's good the way how it goes at the moment. I think for me, sort of like the next step is to look at how can we align technology and industries a bit better. That's probably for us within the organization a key goal.
And personally, do you now still set goals around, like, because CTA was a big goal,
yeah.
right? So
of course, like I mean, I'm that type of person that keeps going anyway.
yeah,
But 100%, I think if I would just now start to procrastinate and then do nothing, I'd be getting bored pretty quickly. So I like to set myself the next goal and the next challenge, and that always has an element of self-development in there. There's an element of contributing to the community, as you know.
yeah.
And obviously driving customer success, I guess, is the right term. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for that. Like I said, it was something I'd wanted to do for a long time, so I really do appreciate you coming in.
No problem.
And there's a huge amount of value in there for anyone listening, so thank you very much.
No worries. Pleasure.
Thank you.